Jared?
I think there are three things that stood out in our release of last week. The first one is that we are seeing a sense of price stabilization in the housing market. And this is because the overall index for housing in the country rose by a margin of 1.14% compared to 1.25% the previous quarter. And looking at it in the context of the general increase in price, that is an indication of the stabilization of housing prices, and therefore an indication of the response of demand to the units that are being put in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
The
Jared,
second, yeah.
Carry on.
The second aspect is that we are seeing an adjustment in terms of the units that are being put in the market in response to areas where the developers perceive to be where there's effective demand. And that perhaps is an indication that the market is realigning so that, we don't have a situation where units are being put in the market and there's no effective demand for the same. So those are really the key things that stood out from the findings of our index.
Mm-hmm. Interesting that you actually brought that point up regarding realigning of the markets. We've seen even banks trying to restructure some of the products that they offer to the market. Currently, we are seeing the uptake of mortgages is pretty low in the market. Perhaps what's some of the reasons around the low uptake of mortgages, and what, in your view, do you think can be done to reverse this?
I think you're right in observing that the number of mortgages we have in the market may not be that high. And this speaks to the fact that, to conclude a mortgage is a very long and lengthy process. So beyond the fact that people are seeking to buy homes using the financial system, the other challenges outside of the control of the financial system or the banks, as it were, that constrain people from concluding mortgages. But having said that, mortgage is just one of the products that those who seek to acquire homes can access from banks. There are households that seek to acquire homes, but they don't want to go for mortgages, so they end up going for fairly shorter term arrangements with their banks, and then they use that for either constructing or for purpose of acquiring homes. So in that respect, they become complementary to mortgages. So the mortgages may appear to understate the extent to which the financial system and banks in particular support the acquisition of homes.
Interesting perspectives there, Jared. Of course, the dream for most Kenyans is to one day own a home. Are we likely to see the mortgages coming down anytime soon, Jared?
Well, I think that has to be seen in the context of the broader macroeconomic circumstances.
Yeah.
And the stability that I indicated in the housing prices is actually a mirror of what's happening in other financial assets. We are seeing a sense of stability in the interest rates with a small blip in the last quarter of the year, then back to stabilization. We are seeing a sense of stabilization in the foreign exchange market. And with overall stability at the macro end, then you expect the households now to have a sense of predictability insofar as their commitment going forward is concerned. And therefore, there's no reason why we can't see the mortgages picking up going forward. But having said that, I think it's also good to acknowledge that mortgage or financing for homes is a long-term investment. And when you lock in for a longer term, the market is likely to move up and down. But generally, so long as you have a sense of stability, and that's what we are seeing right now, there's no reason why then we can't see the trend of mortgage uptake being on the upward.
Well, Jared, I do know you interact with all manner of data, and one of the other key developments we've seen in the market is the land pricing. We've seen land pricing being a crucial factor when it comes to real estate, and so far a lot of analysts have come out saying, hey, it seems like the land pricing system in Kenya is sort of overpriced. There's a lot of speculation when it comes to land. And from your end, what are your views regarding land pricing moving forward? We've seen areas like Upper Hill, land appreciating by over 40%, and an acre going for close to 500 million shillings. And ideally, Upper Hill was meant to be a residential area. It's slowly becoming the financial center of Kenya.
First of all, you're right in your observation that land is a very key component insofar as the provision of houses is concerned. Yeah. And when you start seeing the price of land skyrocketing that way, that as a manifestation insofar as the investment, particular levels of investment are concerned. If you see the price of land going up, then for the housing developers to get a return on their investment, they must see how many units they have to put in the market so they're able to recoup their investments. And that's why in areas where you're seeing high land prices, and this is the amount of data that we crunch tells us, we tend to see those areas now being subject to adjustments that I earlier mentioned. In areas where there is high price for land, typically the standalone houses are giving way to apartments, so that that can now lead to investors recouping their returns. But the one thing that really needs to be appreciated is that the reason why we are seeing a concentration of an increase in land price in particular areas is because in those areas we have the requisite infrastructure that can support a development. If we had new areas opening up insofar as infrastructure is concerned, then perhaps that will contribute towards ameliorating the rate at which the cost of land increases, and therefore seeing an expansion of investments in housing in the outer skirts, as opposed to the concentration that we are seeing in areas where there is infrastructure. So typically where there is requisite infrastructure, you see the cost of land increasing, and when the cost of land increases, we see the standalone houses now giving way to apartments, and that ultimately leads to the pursuit of good returns for the investors.
So if I'm speaking on behalf of perhaps developers, how can they realign themselves so that they can benefit from these shifting trends?
I think the investors, just like any other rational economic agent, respond to incentives, and the key incentive is return. So if you see areas that are opening up and there's opportunity to develop housing, and those areas have requisite infrastructure, then I think you can respond accordingly by putting in units that are aligned to the demand that exists in the market. And we are seeing that happening. When you see new highways developing, almost instantaneously, you see the cost of land adjusting in those areas. And you see investors now moving in those areas. When you see the thicker superhighway and these are the pipers that are coming up, you see investments happening around those areas. And that tells you that investment in infrastructure is actually a driver to the incentives for the developers to move into particular areas. So infrastructure is at the very core of not just the price of land, but also the response by developers to move to those areas in response to expected demand for the units that they put in the market.
Jared, I know we're running out of time, but I have two last questions, if my director allows me. Jared, yesterday we saw Saiton releasing a report indicating that Mombasa Road was actually unattractive because of the traffic, and a lot of investors were shying away from putting up office spaces along Mombasa Road. That was one of the key outcomes. I'd like to get your views on that, as well as if you can also give us your views on, currently you're seeing the national government indicating that they want to reduce on domestic borrowing and borrow externally. What are your thoughts on that? If you can take the first question on Mombasa Road being unattractive.
Yeah, I think I've not fully engaged myself on the Saiton report, but I think if indeed those were the findings of the analysis, then one needs to look at investment in housing not as an end in itself. If it comes at with an angle of inconvenience, you can imagine if you invest in an area where you're not able to access social amenities like schools for your children or health facilities or even the office where you work, then that will tend to dampen the attractiveness of that area. So if the observation is that Mombasa Road is cumbersome when it comes to traffic, then it simply means therefore that the area will increasingly become less attractive compared to other areas. So it's a valid observation to the extent that you connect it to the convenience that comes with investment in real estate.
Okay.
And coming to your second question, I think it's always prudent for the government to pursue a policy that seeks to diversify its sources of financing for its programs. Now, when it comes to borrowing, then we are talking about resources that are well beyond what it's able to collect in terms of its revenue in form of taxes. Now, if you are going to switch domestic borrowing to external borrowing, of course the assumption is that you're going to, in a way, give some accommodation in terms of the extent to which the local interest rate regime will be under pressure. But remember, if the resources that you acquire externally are not deployed in sectors that one can describe as exportable, meaning they are not creating the capacity of the economy to earn exports, then when indeed you are going to repay the loans, you're going to put your foreign currency under pressure. And if that foreign currency is under pressure and it leads to inflation, then that will mean that the central bank obviously will have to tighten policy, and that will negate the whole essence of seeking to go outside. So I think it's good to pursue a balance, but it's also good to know that once you pursue that balance by going external, the resources that come as a result of external borrowing must be allocated to areas that are going to create capacity for the economy to earn foreign exchange earnings, therefore be able to repay those resources that are coming out from the external markets.
Many thanks there, Jared, for being articulate and giving us deep insights as to what's happening in the real estate sector, as well as in the interest rate regime. Many thanks. Always a pleasure to have you on our show.